The United States is a sprawly country, as you'll know if you've ever watched city YouTube. What's strange though is that despite this, the best rail services in the US tend to still be urban. And while it might seem like suburban transit is kind of an oxymoron, trust me, it isn't. Places from Canada to Australia, and yes, Europe and Asia, and even the US show that you can have good transit service in suburban places. In the US, a lot of the new suburban rail, seen in the last couple of decades, has been created via extending light rail and rapid transit lines an ungodly distance into the suburbs, leading to slow and uncomfortable trips. That desire to build more transit in the suburbs, as well as the fact that the US has a lot of suburbs, means that there is huge potential for better suburban and regional rail in the US. If the US wants to get better at suburban rail, it has a lot of good systems it can look to. I made a video some time ago about how one great example to look to is Australia, which has a number of good suburban rail systems, most of which I've explained in videos before. Australia is similarly sprawly, has a similar-ish culture, and has built a lot of new suburban rail over the last few decades. And of course, if you watch this channel regularly or subscribe to my Substack, which you can subscribe to for free and read most articles for free, you'll know that I think Canadian cities like Montreal with its REM and especially Toronto with its GO expansion program provide great models for improved suburban rail service in cities that are even closer to the US. But the truth is, the US doesn't need to look outwards for good ideas. The reality is the US basically already has all of the constituent elements of a great regional or suburban rail system. It just hasn't put them together yet. Now, I've individually talked about a lot of these features in previous videos, but it's worth reiterating them and why they matter. Salt Lake City's Frontrunner service has improved a lot in recent years, and it features full-level boarding, which is great for accessibility because people in wheelchairs, for example, don't need to use a special door to board the train, but it also makes the train service faster because people can get on and off of the train much more quickly. At the center of most high-frequency, high-quality suburban and regional rail systems internationally are city center through running tracks, usually placed in complex underground tunnels. These allow for easier cross-city trips, but also for turning frequent trains around in spacious suburbs rather than the congested core. And Philly, with its city center tunnel built in exactly this vein, shows that the US can build this kind of project. It just needs to run far more service through it. Something that both Philly and LA get right is the regional scale of their regional rail networks. So often commuter or suburban rail systems in Canada or the US really just exist on a single corridor. But both Philly and LA have sprawling regional train systems operated entirely by or mostly by a single agency. That makes it a lot easier for passengers to navigate what can be quite complex systems and make journeys from one part of the region to another. And then there's electrification, which again, Philly is really good at. Philly just kind of has the best suburban rail system in North America right now. Might be something that changes in the future, but it does right now. And I do have to say that the various New York area suburban railways, like Metro North and New Jersey Transit, also do this really well. Electrification is obviously good for the planet, but it also just makes common sense in a country like the US that often has transit projects which receive short bursts of large capital funding. Good for building an electrification system that can then allow you to use your lower operating funding to buy cheaper trains that are cheaper to maintain and last much longer. Build wires once and actually maintain them, and you get the benefits of lower operating costs forever. One place these systems do struggle with, though, is using modern trains. And by modern, I don't mean new, I mean new in countries that are good with trains. But for this, you only need to look to Dallas or the Bay Area's Caltrain system, both of which are adopting modern multiple-unit trains based on designs not from North America. I also think it's worth looking at Denver, which despite having a lot of issues with its new electrified suburban rail network, has a new electrified suburban rail network. Denver is a good case study in showing that that kind of construction and build out of a large network is not only possible in the US, but it can actually happen pretty quickly. I should also say that the US is pretty good at making existing rapid transit and light rail services fast, kind of out of necessity. The US was early to adopting metro systems with higher top speeds, and the US generally punches above its weight in terms of the amount of express rail services that are available. Now, while these positive elements do exist scattered across the country, there are a lot of forces which hold suburban rail service in the US back. For one, relatively small investments that aren't made in things like electrification and better station infrastructure have huge recurring costs in things like bespoke rolling stock that sometimes is dual mode and sometimes has stairs at the doors. There are also far too few suburban rail systems that not only serve the downtown core, but also other major activity centers like airports, convention centers, and other places that lots of people want to travel. Oftentimes, commuter rail doesn't even serve the 9 to 5 business district at the center of downtown, often stopping at the edge of the city center. To solve this, more Philly city center tunnels and Denver-style new suburban lines are desperately needed. And all of that isn't helped by what can often be a very limited service, particularly outside of the Northeast and New York in particular. Generally, the US needs to move from the commuter rail model of a few trains in the morning and a few trains out in the evening to an all-day, bidirectional, higher frequency service. That doesn't mean trains have to run every 10 minutes or even every 15. Hourly, basic bidirectional regional train service that operates at the same time every single hour is actually really good. But better service is also needed in urban areas. Light rail systems and subways operate at least every 10 minutes or so on average, and suburban rail shouldn't be any different. And it also shouldn't stop running at 7 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. People going out late at night are a huge market for transit. Fares and service also desperately need to be integrated. You shouldn't pay a lower fare for using a slower mode of transit. If regional rail is the best mode, you should be able to take that with no extra cost. Otherwise, we're stratifying transit commuters. And in some places, the cost here is probably on the agencies themselves. For example, running expensive to operate suburban bus routes right next to rail lines because people can't access those rail services because of their higher non-integrated fares. Fortunately, the challenges, which are real, are really overwhelmed by the potential. For one, if more suburban rail could be built, you'd be expanding ever-popular rail service to more of the places people live and work. Probably more importantly, I think strong suburban rail would be really good for the suburbs. It would help to transition people to environmentally friendly modes of transportation. That's not electric cars, it's electric rail, walking, and cycling. But it would also form nodes in the suburbs that justify densification on a significant scale. We're not just talking 5/1s, we're talking about high-rises here. Suburban rail can also be way faster than light rail or most metro systems. The MARC Penn line between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. goes up to 125 miles per hour, or 200 kilometers per hour in the reasonable measurement system. That high speed means transit doesn't just compete with highways, it blows them out of the water. You're never going to be driving that fast. That being said, I do have to dock major points from MARC, Amtrak, and policymakers because MARC is currently running diesel trains on electrified lines because apparently the cost of electricity from the overhead lines is prohibitive. This is the definition of a policy failure. There's also just an untapped market for good new suburban rail lines in the US. After the US got pretty effective at building light rail systems, it feels like basically every major city in the country has at least 1 or 2 lines. And if the US got similarly good at building modern suburban rail, you could see the same thing, where lines proliferate from one city to the next. There are so many good projects that could be built if there was more of a knowledge base for building a modern suburban electric rail project. So as you get each new project built, you're lowering the barriers to new projects getting added to the pipeline, which is really valuable for transit in general. Of course, a big part of that is creating a set of standards that systems across the country can follow. A lot of the modern DMU regional rail services being built in California and Texas actually have very similar standards for things like platform heights and top speeds. Creating more comprehensive national level technical standards for regional and suburban rail that are modern could be really helpful. Take some of the technical elements like electrification and signaling from the Northeast and combine that with the more modern service model, vehicles, and staffing policies of systems in California and Texas, and you have a really good standard. There's also a ton of opportunity for collaboration, most obviously with Amtrak. Suburban rail infrastructure can and should have lots of capacity, and if it means boosting Amtrak service, adding a little extra capacity so more Amtrak trains can run is a great idea. Better suburban rail networks in every city also means that Amtrak trains can get into and out of that city more easily, acting as a rising tide that lifts all boats. The obvious other place for more collaboration is with the freight railways. Better regulation and cooperation with the freight railways could force them to implement better technology and standards that make running passenger trains on freight tracks easier. That's not to mention the safety benefits and capacity benefits for the freight railways themselves. But it should also mean taking the helping freight railways help themselves much further. Don't like suburban trains blocking your hot intermodal filled with containers full of plastic toys? Well, allow public passenger train operators to build parallel tracks in your freight right-of-ways as of right. That allows everyone to benefit from the valuable right-of-ways that freight railway companies have, and it gets the passenger traffic off of their tracks. If these measures were implemented, the impacts could be huge. In Denver, for example, you could have high-speed through-running suburban trains operating with modern vehicles at high frequencies. Not completely different from on a lot of American light rail systems, but not Denver's light rail system, because they insist on ordering old trains for it, but that's a story for a different video. With a new city center tunnel, you'd also probably have much better connections in downtown and coverage of major trip generators like sports arenas. High-density development at outlying suburban stations would create areas for suburban density to coalesce and for people to live car light without living downtown. So that's the potential for a future with better suburban and regional rail in the US. And it's a good one and an achievable one. Thanks for watching.